What's up, guys? Welcome to this episode of the Ask a Creator Economist podcast. On this episode, we have two questions. The first of which comes from a Frederique, who's a startup consultant and podcaster, a little bit unsure of her abilities as a podcaster, wants some help figuring out how to get better, how to improve her interviewing skills. So, we actually give her what we're going to call a training plan, which is actionable steps she could take to become a better podcaster. It includes things like becoming a better interviewer, becoming a better listener, becoming better at segues, and just becoming a better overall public speaker. So we hope you guys like that question. The second question comes from a Johannes, who's a Twitter user. I'm not sure if he's a creator or not, but he asked us what's going on with Twitter threads, or I'm sorry, Twitter versus threads. And why can't we use it here in the European Union and in the EU in general? There are some GDPR issues, some data issues at play, and there's a lot of complexity. We don't know if we're even going to be able to use threads in the foreseeable future. So we talk about the landscape of the creator economy, of social media, of the like geo segmentation that has kind of arisen. And yeah, we just give them some of our thoughts on the creator economy as a whole and on tribalism too. A little nugget there for me. So hope you guys like this episode. If you do like it, please give it a share with a friend who it might help, another content creator. Give it a like, give us a rating on any of your podcast platforms, and give us a sub on YouTube if you are watching this on YouTube. It would really help. And I will see you guys again next week. All right, Thomas. So let's go ahead and hop into question one, which comes from a Frederica. Frederica is a startup consultant and a podcaster, and here is her question. I started podcasting a few weeks ago, but I feel I'm not very good at it yet. So I wonder, how can I train to become better? My pod is about startups, and I have a good network of founders. So I did a few interviews and also recorded a few episodes explaining concepts like lean startup, but I didn't yet crack the code. So to speak, how can I hone my skills? Frederica, thank you for your question. Um, this is a tough one, right? It's a tough one for a lot of content creators. I'll just give my quick thoughts and I'll pass it over to you, Thomas. Being a content creator is like a muscle, or creating content rather is like a muscle. And I think you really do need to practice it, and you do need to spend a considerable amount of hours getting good at something. And podcasting, and Frederica, you say that you do interviews. I think that interviewing people and having this natural approachable demeanor with people is a tough one, and it's something that you do need to practice. And I think with just executing and getting your reps, I think you will get better at that. Like some of the best interviewers we've ever seen, Sean Evans from Hot Ones, what's his name, biggest radio host, Thomas.
Can't tell you the name. I'm blanking.
Well, Bill Simmons is somebody in like the sports niche. Um, yeah, like these are guys who they got better and better by practicing their craft. So that's just what I want to say. You really do. Just, I know that sounds like boring advice, but just simply getting your reps as a podcaster is one of the most important things. You start to hone your craft with like the little things, like you say a lot less, you say like a lot less. You're a lot more like methodical with your sentences, and you can like see the bigger picture. So I think that's like a big one. Like if you probably go back to some of the earlier podcasts that we've done, like I think my entire cadence has changed. I've gotten way better. I don't say as much or stumble on my words. And I think that's just something you'll get better at. Thomas, what do you think?
Yes, they say practice makes perfect, and that is certainly one aspect. But then, what I really like about how Frederic you put the question is that you explicitly talk about like training. How can you really train it a bit like almost in sports? And I mean to be really good in sports, you will or to get really good in a certain sport, you will need a training plan and you will need a lot of structure in your training. And I thought almost like, okay, what what would you put into a podcaster or one level above it, like a content creator training plan? And well, I don't have a complete one for you yet, but it is how my mind triggered, and I think it's good to approach it in a bit of a structured way. And learning by doing is nice, but what do you need to do? What do you want to focus on? So, for instance, like you said, you want to cut down in podcasting on the you want to cut down on the likes. So maybe set a very specific goal for the next episode that you create that you want to fulfill that you want to reach when you record this episode. This could be something about your speech patterns. It could also be a interviewing tactic, and that is definitely something that you can do, right? Have a goal, be focused on achieving this, and then also repeating this, right? Doing it like 2, 3, 4 episodes in a row, focusing on one thing, and then listen again to the new episodes you created. I think that is, by the way, also very important. Many people don't listen to the things they create. Maybe because they don't have the time. Another reason in podcasting, many people don't like hearing their own voice, so they struggle with that. But I try to listen to most of the stuff that we put out ourselves, just because this way I understand it as a listener, not as somebody who is talking. And that is where I really pick up on things that I think I can change or we can change. So that is definitely also part of the training plan, to review your actual performances, so to speak. And then when I first got into podcasting, which is like 10 years ago already, insane, I also had a phase where I started listening to podcasts very differently. Because once you start doing something for yourself, also the way you consume something changes completely, and you become much more analytical. And then pick a few people and a few podcasts that you really like, and you will just automatically, and you can enforce this as well by focusing on it, listening to what they do. What are the interviewing techniques they use? Some people, for instance, they use their own vulnerability as a tool to get the guests to be much more open by themselves. So there is all these little things and tactics almost that good interviewers have practiced. And likewise, when you say you explain concepts, then how can you, in an audio only format, I think it's really tough to have very topical, like for instance, explaining lean startup things, and you need to be really good. I think that is such an editorialized type of podcast, a super tough to execute genre. And there you need to be really good at getting to the point, really good at conveying concepts without any layer of imagery that you use in it. And that makes it maybe a bit more challenging, but if you pull it off, also potentially very interesting to get this into place. Well, so you have listening to your own stuff as one part of your training plan, listening analytically to other people, and you have the executing with focusing on certain areas that you want to specifically improve and work on. And I think that is a good basis for a training plan if you want to think in this sports methodology almost.
Yeah, I just want to kind of go back a little bit to what you said, Thomas, which I think is so true. I forget exactly what you said, but you said something about being like relatable or being
Vulnerable.
vulnerable. Exactly. I think that's huge. I wouldn't say you should be self-deprecating where you like make fun of yourself, but definitely showing vulnerability or showing that the person you're interviewing is somebody you look up to, right? Do you hold them in esteem and in allure? And I want to talk about a recent podcast that I watched, I think today actually, where the podcaster, not a very big podcaster, not the the most recognizable or the most well known podcaster, has a guy named Alex Hormozy on his podcast who has become probably one of the top like business influencers, I think, probably right now, to be honest. Anyway, he interviews him at the very beginning of the interview in this remote podcast. He basically says, "Now, Alex, we spent so much time together." And Alex is like, "What do you mean by that?" He's like, "Well, I've consumed so much of your content that you've become like it's as if I know you personally, right? And like I look up to you and I love your content. I feel like you've taught me so much about life." And he like right off the rip, you could just see the biggest smile on Alex's face, on Alex Hormozy's face. Like, damn, like okay, this person like knows me, knows my content, really looks up to me. Like, And it was probably one of the best podcasts I've ever listened to from that point on. Like it was just such an
Wow.
open, good podcast. And this podcaster, I'm so sorry I'm forgetting his name. I'll look it up and I'll post it. Um, I'll post it in the show notes. Like he was just such a good interviewer, and that was something that he was doing really well. Was just being relatable and actually responding to the stuff that Alex was saying. So not just waiting to jump to the next question. And I want to give a quick list of homework, right? So you want to get better at podcasting, you want to grow your podcast. Here are my quick homework items that I think you should be doing. First of which is consume content. Thomas already mentioned this. Find good podcasters that you want to emulate and just consume their content, like Thomas said, with an ear for how they're doing it. Like, what are the intricacies about them that makes them different than other podcasters? Second one, practice public speaking. Next time you're in a social situation, tell some stories, get better at storytelling and at like composing narratives with like a beginning, an intro, a climax, an end, and all that kind of stuff. Third thing is be well researched on the person and on the topics that you'll be covering in the podcast. Just having talking points, bullet points is an effective thing. Third thing is get better at segues. This one's a little bit difficult, but understand how to use segues effectively, where you don't just jump to the next question to carry the conversation forward, right? To make it related to what you're talking about. Third thing or next thing is responding to your guest before asking more questions. I already said that. Make sure you respond to what they said and add something to the conversation. And the last thing is finding the nugget. So I used to study journalism. Something that we learned to get good at, and that was the core of our job, was what's the story here? What's the nugget in the thing that we're talking about? How can I take this and make it interesting for the listener, right? Not for you and your guest, but for the listener. So that's like my quick homework tips, or things that you should do to get better.
Yeah, and
Um,
one
yeah.
more thing about interviews that goes pretty much to what you phrased as like respond to your guests. So back in the days, I also wanted to become a journalist. I'm slowly but surely getting old, and back then becoming there was no such thing as a content creator. You did journalism, and so the first few times that I did in an internship back in the days an interview, it was really just I prepared a question, read it to the person, they answered, and then I looked at my list, did the next. And it was also for a different medium because it was for print, and so that is also very different than
uh,
podcasts. Podcasts
you
are
don't need the nuance.
yeah, and you also
Yeah.
it's also just written interviews are so different because very often you didn't even do them in person, right? You just sent something over, then the person would answer, the publicist would correct, and then blah blah. So
Yeah.
that was the process. But why podcasts I think became so successful is because you could hear these unfiltered conversations and the really good interviewers in specifically the podcast format, which is so different from TV, for instance, where you have like 5 minutes and you need to ask just those questions. But you tend to have more long form interviews, but these are really much more conversational. Like think of a Joe Rogan talking for hours and hours on end, sometimes just shooting the shit and then getting more topical and so on. And I think the key, if you want to pull interviews off in a podcast, is to not think of yourself like an interviewer who asks questions, but more as a conversational sparrings partner. And as you also say, Frederica, that you are a startup consultant, you have this network with founders. I guess you will know your stuff, and if you know your stuff, you can have these conversations. So yes, have like I would almost advise against having questions, a bunch of questions noted down before you record a podcast with a guest. What my method is, I maybe have one or two specific questions noted down, but otherwise I have more like areas that I want to cover, topical areas, and then I have 3, 4 for a conversation, but then I stay super open to go with the flow of the conversation, to listen, really listen to what the other person is saying, see which direction do they want to take the conversation in, and go with the flow. And if you manage to do this, which I guess you're as a consultant, you're super good at it because you talk to clients all the time and you do all these things that are conversational. Communication is certainly part of your skill set. Just do it in a recorded format and don't do this for interviews specifically. I think that is very very important, and a philosophy that works in podcasts.
Yeah, definitely. I think just to wrap this up, don't think of it like an interview too. I think with startup podcasts and with business oriented podcasts in general, the ones that I've seen that have worked the best, think of like My First Million. If you don't know them, definitely look into My First Million. They're one of the best like founders slash startup slash investing podcasts. They don't really do things like their interviews. Um, Sam Parr, one of the hosts of My First Million, they had a interview with the one of the founders of I think Morning Brew, and at the time he was also starting a newsletter type business, and they were like legit competitors. And he had him on, and he opens the podcast with like, "Dude, I fucking hated you." And he's like, "Whoa, what do you mean?" He's like, "Yeah, man. Like, I was building my thing, you were building your thing. We hated each other. We were copying each other. Like, I fucking hated you, but like, you made me better." And by starting it with that, it was like, okay, this is not going to be a traditional interview. This
Yeah,
is going to be like a conversation, and
yeah,
I think that kind of stuff works well. So you can maybe test that out if you do have that type of personality, right? So,
yeah.
Frederica,
But by the
hope
way,
this helped.
both
Yeah,
examples that you gave did the same thing. They
yeah,
started a conversation with something that was like surprising and just opened a whole world of
yeah,
conversation from then you also
yeah,
you can't control it anymore after this. You need to see where it goes, but then that is also what can create this excitement that makes people stick around.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, do something off the beaten path. I think that's what sells nowadays. Most people, they want to consume stuff where they feel like they are in the room with you. They're a fly on the wall, right? So, Frederica, hope that helps. If you do have another question, please do go ahead and submit it. For anyone here listening, head over to unify.io/podcast. You can submit questions, you can view previous episodes, give us a like and a share with a friend who you think this might help, another content creator. Give us a subscribe on YouTube if you are watching on YouTube. um, it's nice you get the video version on Spotify, on YouTube. And yeah, we hope you guys enjoy the podcast. We will go ahead and move on to question two. Question two is kind of a topical question. It's a question, but based on a certain topic that's a little bit challenging, especially for us here in Europe. And it comes from Johannes, and Johannes is a Twitter user. And here is his question. He says, Meta slash Instagram launched Threads the other week, but in the EU we can't use it. There's also the ongoing discussion about TikTok getting banned. The creator economy used to be more or less global, minus China maybe, but that seems to change. How do you expect this to unfold? So this, as I mentioned, this is a tough one. We are in the EU. We wish we could use Threads just to check it out, see how it goes, and even build a following in its infancy. That's kind of the time when you do want to try to build an audience on a new platform where there's a lot of evergreen niches that you can potentially build an audience in. So it's brutal. It's rough, Johannes. We understand. Thomas, you had some thoughts on this. You want to go ahead and take it away first?
Yeah, certainly. I was reading quite a bit about threats and why it can't go to the European Union. I mean, as a software company ourselves, and also dealing with a lot of these things. Of course, something that I have a not only private but also professional interest in. Um, so the top level, I don't want to go into all the legal details, but in general, think many people are aware that in the European Union privacy, data privacy laws are really important, that we have a certain stance on it, and we also tend to in the European Union not like it if data from our European Union civilians is shipped to other non-European Union jurisdictions. So in the US, there is also a new thing, the European Union Digital Markets Act. There have also been a few lawsuits that Facebook or Meta Inc. recently lost, and all this led to the conclusion that Instagram/Meta decided, hey, we cannot launch threats in the European Union. There is too much legal risk. We need clarity. So just the I think this week, last week, the Biden administration finalized a new data transfer agreement with the European Union. I think that is one of the things that need to be completely clear before Facebook launches threats here over in Europe. So that is just to give you a rough idea, sparing the more minute details of what the state is there. And then, of course, the TikTok situation, that is, if you will, social media geopolitics right now. It's of course about the Chinese ownership of TikTok, and should it be banned? Should China get all this user data? And that is the discussion going on here. But I think Johannes, what you say about the creator economy becoming more fragmented, more like it, yeah, less of a global affair, is a really valid question. And I believe you are onto something here, because back in the days, in like the late 90s, early 2000s, there was very little to no regulation, little laws that specifically governed the internet. And it was more or less global. And even if some laws that were not explicitly made for the digital economy did apply, there was little fact checking, little mechanisms governments possessed. And this has, of course, completely changed. Right now, the governments look at uh, uh, all the data. They look at how can their law enforcement bodies, their how do you call something like the not the FBI, but the other big one. Well, the security services,
The
national.
FCC.
Yeah, the no, the yeah, the more the security agencies, and see the guys who have the spies.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm blanking on the term here, but anyways,
CIA.
yeah, the CIA and these bodies. So if if you look at all these organizations, they have built out surveillance capabilities, data
Ah, you're talking
analytics
about like the
capabilities.
NSA, the CIA,
Yeah,
like the okay.
yeah,
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
yeah, all these organizations. And so now, and at the same time, we have a lot more laws and regulations that also govern the digital playing field, the digital economy, and so on. And just by the very nature of our states, which are nation states, and sometimes you have these bodies like the European Union, where nation states coordinate, not unlike what the US is doing with the state level and the federal level and so on. It means internet law, because the law is geographically applied, internet law is, and that makes it more complicated to operate digital services at a global scale, because of course, if you want to operate in a certain market, then you also need to comply with all the laws. And then on top, if you are a content creator and you want to have a business, then the same also goes for you in the end, right? Like, there are different laws, for instance, about content, what you are allowed to publish, what not, like free speech laws and so on. And if you publish something in the US, this might be fine in the US, it might not be fine in the European Union. Now, people can access it because the internet, and luckily and hopefully for a long time, will still be open in terms of access. But but even this, there are no guarantees. So, long story short, I think all this leads to a creator economy that is going to be increasing. There will be more boundaries going forward for all these different reasons that come together. And I, of course, cannot predict clearly what this will mean for individual creators and for genres, but maybe it will mean one thing specifically that I want to raise here. Because currently, if you owned a niche in a big language, and the biggest on the internet, certainly English, maybe then followed by Spanish, Mandarin. But the Chinese internet has always been a closed down affair, not accessible for the big platforms, not for therefore for the big content creators. But if we set aside China, then it used to be published in English, and you could get a huge audience globally. And if we get more and more of these borders, then it means maybe that it's not only language, the important business decision, in which language do you publish, right? If we do this here in English, we could also do something like this in German, would maybe be more differentiated, but in startup lingo, the total addressable market would be much smaller because also most Germans, of course, speak English. But the more territorial platforms become, the more territorial um, um, content creators need to be, the smaller the addressable market might get for individual creators, but also new players can enter the field if they really understand where there are now new blue oceans or new playing fields.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can't really comment too much on the like the data part that Thomas opened up with. But I will say an interesting thing that I've noticed happen with social media specifically is that it's become like cult of following driven. Now bear with me for a second, right? So social media, let's just say 8 years ago, 9 years ago, we'll just say 10 to keep it nice and even. You had Facebook, you had, I think Instagram was already around by then. You had like maybe the very beginnings of Twitter. You had LinkedIn.
Oh, we had
Um,
not the early Twitter stages. 10 years ago, Twitter was
Twitter was already
mature.
around, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
2007,
fuck,
I
man,
created
time
my
is flying.
account. Yeah, time is flying.
Ugh, don't say it. Anyway, so 10 years ago, you had all these different platforms. There was healthy competition. You don't really like, yeah, Jack Dorsey, everyone knows him, but there's not like a cult of following behind Jack Dorsey versus Zuckerberg. There's not like these personality conflicts going on between each of these like social media CEOs. I don't like ever since Elon has taken over Twitter, it seems like there's been this it's almost like reality television where they're gonna have like a cage match and he called him a cuck on Twitter, like he tweeted that Zuck is a cuck or something. It's become very like vitriolic and tribalist, right? And I think that's kind of crazy where now layer that on top of what Thomas is talking about with like, geo-based segmentation of social media. And now you also have this kind of like cult segmentation, right? Where if you're pro Elon or pro Zuck or whatever, I don't know what pro Zuck means. Does that mean you're pro robot or alien? Who knows? But that seems to be like
Metaverse,
another
pro
element.
metaverse.
Sure, if you're if you're not of this world physically, if
Yeah.
you're a manifestation of
And
another multiverse,
and if you don't like legs.
exactly. Yeah, if your eyelids blink horizontally instead of all those types of things,
Yeah.
So, and I think that's super interesting. I think it's kind of created already, like, what is it? Lines in the sand, where you're seeing it's even become like somewhat political. I don't want to get into that, but I think that's crazy, and I think it represents an opportunity as well for creators to kind of like find, like Thomas said, find where that blue ocean exists. Could be on one platform, it could be on another. It's crazy to say this, but with all of this controversy around the different social media platforms, it's kind of crazy to say that TikTok seems to be like the most the most normal out of all of them, which is like such a far cry from where we were, just like 2 years ago, when they or a year ago when they were in Congress. I think the CEO of
Yeah.
TikTok with all those funny memes that came from that. But yeah, that's those are just my thoughts on the whole thing. I do wish we did have a more accessible, more global internet, but it's quickly becoming the contrary. So yeah, I don't have much else to add to that.
Me
Hopefully
neither.
Thomas
No, but it's
gave
an
you guys
interesting
enough.
topic, and thanks for the question, Johannes. And
Yeah,
let's see how global or local the internet's future is going to be. Certainly,
yeah.
very interesting.
And as they say, Bitcoin solves this, right? Hashtag Bitcoin solves this.
Yeah,
Something
potentially.
that Bitcoin people love to say all the time.
Uh,
Yeah.
whole other discussion, maybe for the next time.
Yeah, guys, hope you liked this episode. If you did like it, please give it a like, give it a share with another creator who you think it might help. Give us a subscribe on YouTube. If you do watch this on YouTube, you can also watch the video version on Spotify. Submit a question. Go to unify.io/podcast. Submit your question. We would be happy to get to it in the next episode. We'll send it to you, tag you on social media once we do answer it. And Thomas, thanks for being here with me this week.
Sure.
And
And there is one more thing that you can do if you are still around and if you want to support us here, then go to Unyfy.io and use our product to build your own platform, because I think we built something that is really, really useful for many content creators, and we want to give you the right toolkit to build an independent digital business so that you're also less reliant on the big platforms and all the geopolitics unfolding that we talked about. And as a startup, we don't have the big VC money, and that means we need customers, and we want to service you, build something that is great for you. So give Unify a try. That helps us out the most. And let us know what you think, what we can improve, of course, and what you liked.
Yep, great addition there, Thomas. Great ending. And we'll see you guys next week.